If you would like to support the channel, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. More information in the description below. At the heart of what's to come is this being, Odin, the so-called All-Father, though the giants of Jotunheim and gods of other realms would argue that Ymir the first giant was the true All-Father and Odin was his killer. Legend says that Odin killed his father, Ymir, and a tear in the fabric of reality opened up. Odin glimpsed the secret of creation for just a moment. It cost him his eye and instilled within him madness. After Ymir's death, Odin shaped the realms. He made his home in Asgard. His city, his great lodge, was built over the site, around the tear. He was a deeply complex man, sinister, cunning, and, well, convincing. Those who had the favor of Odin might see him as a rational, open-minded, fair king, but should one draw his ire, even if they once believed themselves to be beloved, he would inflict any pain or punishment necessary to get what he wanted. Physical anguish, mental torture, it didn't matter. And it was hard to argue with a man so at ease with lying and manipulating. But again, if Odin felt love, affection, or favor, then life at his side could be wondrous. When Odin was young, he relentlessly pursued knowledge related to that tear in reality that he had seen. He spent lifetimes following every clue and lead that he could find. It led him to the Mask of Creation, an object that would allow him to open full the realm of creation, to take control over his destiny. Odin found a part of the mask after a great journey, but he could not read the writing upon it. The tantalizing mystery would haunt him. The greatest knowledge that could ever be obtained was right in front of him, yet it was completely unobtainable. Odin and his Aesir, the gods of Asgard, believed themselves to be superior above all others, and that they were entitled to hold dominion over the 9 realms. The Aesir found themselves constantly at odds and in conflict with the Vanir gods of Vanaheim and the Jotnar giants of Jotunheim. For the most part, the other realms kept to themselves, or they were too small to play a part in the petty fights and politics of the Aesir. A leader of the Vanir, a god named Freyr, wanted to bring peace between the realms, or rather, all the realms and the Aesir. So Freyr went to Asgard to try to broker peace. As a gift to the Aesir, he taught them some of their coveted wild Vanir magic, specifically how to grow crops using Seidr magic. His magic was so powerful that it could feed all of Asgard, but the Aesir couldn't wield the magic properly, and they ended up poisoning their own crops. They blamed Freyr for their own shortcomings, and a drunken mob threw Freyr into a fire. He managed to escape some hours later, badly hurt and in hostile territory, but he made it back home to Vanaheim. The other Vanir gods were enraged, and thus began the Long War. While the gods fought, the mortals suffered, to no one's surprise. After all, what's a few centuries of war and a couple body-rending injuries to the immortal? What the Aesir of Asgard lacked in strategy and focus, they made up for in brutality. But one day, a strange being from a faraway land to the south appeared within the court of Odin, a fey creature who called himself Mimir. He was once a jester, advisor, and servant to the fairy king, who was a most cruel and vain man. Mimir left his homeland after the fairy king's favor turned against him and found a new home in Asgard. He became a trusted advisor and sometimes enabler to Odin, a tactical mind who brought balance to the war fervor of the Aesir. But while Mimir touted himself as the smartest man alive, he wasn't so cunning that he could outwit Odin. Oftentimes, Mimir's ploys and schemes were sniffed out by the All-Father, though Odin rarely played his hand. Mimir was wise and interesting enough to be kept around, and eventually believed himself to be a good friend of Odin. But as the years carried on, Mimir began to care about those who suffered due to Odin's indifferences. He started trying to wrangle him in, talk him down from his obsessions, began planting seeds for peace talks. Such things would take many, many years, however. Odin ever longed for knowledge to accompany his power, and was drawn to the allure of prophecies. Odin's first wife was actually a Jotnar goddess, a giant named Fjordin, and he truly loved her, despite his disdain for the Jotnar and the ongoing war. It's not clear how she felt about Odin, though. But the two of them, they had a son, Thor, half giant, half Aesir. But Fjordin died. How isn't known, but it left a crater in Odin's heart. He proved himself to be a horrible, abusive parent to Thor. Nothing was good enough for Odin. He constantly insulted and berated Thor for his perceived shortcomings, and Odin created a monster in his son. Thor drank to numb the pain, fought to feel something other than shame and sadness, and seemed to hate himself as much as his father did. Odin taught him, forced him to despise the giants, of which he was half. Every torture Odin inflicted on Thor was to break him down, to bring him to heel, to make him an attack dog. In an effort to win this long war, Odin commissioned a weapon be made by the great dwarven blacksmiths, Brock and Sindri, the Huldra brothers. It would be a weapon that could level mountains, kill gods, and even destroy the giants of Jotunheim. Brock and Sindri created the great hammer Mjolnir for Odin, who immediately gave it to his son Thor. Odin commanded Thor to use it against all the enemies of the Aesir, to never cease his fighting and bloodshed, a command that Thor readily complied with. Thor had become a true killer, and countless were murdered by the Aesir god. The dwarven blacksmiths Brock and Sindri realized what they had done, what they had created. They were consumed with regret and began bickering over who was to blame. They kept working together, perfecting and honing their skills in hopes that one day they could make up for crafting Mjolnir. Odin heard tell of a Jotnar sorceress named Groa, who could see glimpses of the future. Thor was sent on a quest with her husband, Arvandil, with secret orders from Odin to kill Arvandil. Odin knew that Groa would use her powers to find him, so he used enchantments to conceal his death. And when her husband never came back, Groa did just that. She began looking into the future to find him. The last vision she saw of Arvandil was of Thor carrying him in a basket on his back after he had been injured from frostbite. But Thor returned home with only an empty basket. She collected tomes and books of knowledge from all around the realms, and with each new script, her powers grew. She never stopped looking, but she wasn't able to find Arvandil, because his death was in the past, so he had no place in the future. Her library became one of the greatest accumulations of knowledge in all the realms. One day, she saw farther into the future than she ever had before, but it wasn't her husband that she saw in her vision. She saw Ragnarok, the end and the beginning. 3 years of Fimbulwinter, a great wolf consuming the sun itself, the appearance of a ghost from another land and his son, the realms uniting against the Aesir, destruction of Asgard, the death of Odin and most of his kin, the remaking of the world. Across the realms, Odin felt this prophecy, and he knew its calling. Ragnarok, he said. The Aesir king found Groa and inquired about her visions under threats of violence. He vowed that if she didn't tell him of this Ragnarok, he would bash her head in, just like Thor did to her husband. So, she lied. She told him that the realms would be destroyed. There would be no safe haven. She told him of a Jotnar champion that would kill him. She muddied the details and didn't tell him about the ghost from another land. If Odin knew that the realms would unite against him, he would destroy them all to save himself. If he knew that only Asgard would be destroyed, he might move the Aesir to another realm to continue his conquests. She told him just enough to convince him that she was telling him the truth. But Odin strangled her with his own hands. He stole her library for himself and began to search for a way to avoid this false prophecy of Ragnarok. The Norse god of war, Tyr, was a figure far different from the Greek god of war. Tyr was a well-traveled, compassionate, diplomatic warrior god. He was well and truly beloved across all the realms for his kindness and his counsel. He didn't usher war, he tried to prevent it. Tyr once united all the realms to create a realm gate for simpler travel. Upon the Lake of the Nine, a great temple was created, and at the corners of the lake, gates were built that led to the 9 realms. Within Tyr's temple, a location was locked in with a rune. The temple shifted its bridge to that realm gate, and a path forward was made. It was unlike anything ever created in the north, a true spectacle of power and ingenuity. During the terrible long war, Tyr tried to find a way to save the giants of Jotunheim. Odin had turned Thor upon them with a demand for genocide. After all, if there were no giants, then there would be no Jotnar champion to kill him. Tyr convinced Odin to travel with him to Jotunheim to pursue peace talks so that the bloodshed would stop, and Odin agreed, but he didn't want to go to Jotunheim for peace. He wanted to go to steal the secrets and powers of the giants for himself. The Jotnar saw through Odin's deceits, told Tyr of his true intentions, and banished Odin from the realm. Tyr understood that he could not stop Odin's bloodlust, so he worked with the giants to safeguard their homeland. Tyr removed the Jotunheim realm gate from the Lake of the Nine and hid it where the Aesir would never be able to reach it, in between the realms. But the giants favored Tyr. They gave him a very special gift, eyes which could channel Bifrost. He would never need a travel rune to get between the realms, he could just use his eyes. And they told him of a single bridge that they would keep to connect themselves to Midgard. His eyes could not activate this bridge, but they gave Tyr a black stone key with a rune upon it. Speaking this rune would unlock the bridge. He hid this black rune stone under his temple in the lake, deep in the vaults behind countless traps. Odin was enraged at Tyr's perceived betrayal, but he did not act against the beloved god of war. He would bide his time and watch Tyr. The long war between primarily the Vanir and the Aesir never truly tipped in the balance of either side. The Aesir used physical combat while the Vanir used magics. Many died, countless innocents suffered, but stalemates were frequent. In an attempt to bring about peace for both sides, Mimir acted as an arbiter between them. He proposed a proposal. The king of the Aesir, Odin, would marry the high goddess of the Vanir, Freyja. Freyr was the brother of Freyja, and she was absolutely against marrying their greatest enemy. The Aesir had killed her people, tried to murder her brother, brought war to her homeland, and Mimir wanted her to marry this mad king? But he assured Freyja that Odin had a compassionate side. Mimir knew that after Odin's first wife had died, he'd been lonely and he longed for companionship. And Freyja was a beautiful, powerful woman who knew magics that Odin dreamed of learning about. The Allfather would jump at the chance to marry her. For some time, Freyja thought it over but was resistant to sharing a bed with her foe. She loathed the idea of being near Odin. But such a marriage, it would bring peace between the realms. To deny her people such a future, it was greedy, no? Freyja agreed to the marriage, to end the war and safeguard her people. As their leader, she knew it fell upon her to make the hard choices. So, she married Odin. She left her homeland and moved on to Asgard. As part of her marriage dowry, she was gifted the wings of a Valkyrie and stood as their queen, who they loved. Odin actually did all he could to make her happy for some time. He granted her every wish, he doted on her, listened to her counsel, he sought her out. The two of them would conceive a son, Balder, whom Freyja called her greatest gift from Odin. He'd actually earned her trust. Freyja began to teach Odin Vanir magics and secrets. When Balder was a baby, a prophecy was delivered to Freyja that one day he would die a needless death. She began seeking a way to prevent that death, a way to save her son. It became an obsession for her to save this child that she so very much adored. To add to this distress, Odin did not use the magics that Freyja taught him for good. The Aesir king began showing Freyja his sadistic side. He would take away his gifts, deny her requests, blame her for his own failings, continually demanding more knowledge from her. The methods he used to raise Thor were often used on Balder as well, though to a far less degree because Freyja was there. Every day seemed worse than the last, and Freyja resigned herself to a lonely life. This video is supported by patrons on Patreon, YouTube members, and Twitch subs. As a community, we spend a lot of time together, chatting in the Discord, weekly streams, cooking and art streams, and sometimes things get a little bit odd, like that time we designed a Kratos pizza and made it on stream. Without the support of patrons, YouTube members, and Twitch subs, I wouldn't be able to do these projects. Ad revenue isn't always the best, but the community keeps this boat afloat. If you would like to help support these projects, check the description for more information. By the way, the pizza was habanero garlic tomato sauce, spicy gyro meat, red onion, red bell pepper, jalapeno, peppercini, Carolina Reaper cheese, olives, and feta cheese. One of the best things I've ever had in my life. Now, back to the lore. Odin's obsessions crescendoed over the coming years. The love all the realms held for Tyr continued to grow, and Odin continued to be jealous. He knew that the Jotnar favored Tyr. He suspected Tyr had helped them to seal off Jotunheim, and Tyr knew of a way to reach that realm. Odin discovered that on the tallest mountain summit in Midgard, there was a bridge doorway to Jotunheim, but it required a special rune stone to activate it. His way into the realm of the giants was right there, but he couldn't pass through it. He began to view this god of war as a traitor, so Odin sent a small army to attack Tyr's temple on the Lake of the Nine, to take it over, to search for the runestone that would open the doorway to Jotunheim atop the mountain summit. But it couldn't be found. Odin imprisoned Tyr within Asgard, but to the rest of the realms, it was like Tyr had just vanished. The only one who knew what became of Tyr was Odin himself. The loss of this god was a grave one for all the realms. He was deeply missed. One fateful day, the strange appearance of a great snake shocked the realm of Midgard. The monolithic thing suddenly dropped into the Lake of the Nine, causing the waters to suddenly rise and flood the valley that it was in. Most of the temple was submerged, docks and ports all around the lake were flooded and destroyed, many were killed, whoever survived was displaced, and the temple itself was abandoned. The great snake became known as Jormungandr, the world serpent. We will tell Jormungandr's story in a chronological sense relative to us, but this snake has been dropped here from the future. He was hit so hard by an Aesir god that he hit a branch of the world tree Yggdrasil itself, and he was thrown back in time. But let's not spoil a good story. Jormungandr has already seen through these stories and is a vicious foe to Odin and his Aesir. Its allegiance lies with the Jotun of Jotunheim, and it holds in its heart a special seething hatred for the one called Thor. The two of them met once, and fought so viciously that all the 9 realms felt the thundering violence. But the battle ended in a stalemate, and Thor never returned to fight Jormungandr again. The world serpent made its home, curled around the mountains of the Lake of the Nine. He protected Tyr's temple and slumbered the years away. The dwarven brothers Brock and Sindri often fought over the creation of Mjolnir and what it was being used for. Sindri was consumed by guilt and feared that they too would be crushed by Thor. Brock mocked him, saying it was just the giants who were being smashed, and after all, what did Sindri think was going to happen giving a weapon like that to the Aesir? He tried to deflect blame, but Brock was also terribly consumed by regret. Sindri told him that they needed to act. They needed to do something. They couldn't pretend that they weren't responsible anymore. It didn't take much to convince Brock. The brothers began planning something that could rival Mjolnir in power, another legendary weapon. For 2 weeks, the blacksmiths worked relentlessly. It was perfectly balanced, infused with magics unmatched in anything in all the realms. Not a single strike of their tools went astray, and as they worked, they sang melancholy melodies of their people. But on the 15th day, a small jet-black spider crawled out from the darkness and began to skitter towards Brock. Brock had crushed its kin, and it wanted revenge. It climbed Brock's leg, and it bit him. Brock felt the small sting, but he would not be distracted. He had landed a single imperfect hammer strike on Mjolnir long ago because of a gadfly bite. But he would not allow that here. He ignored the bite, not knowing that the spider's bite was venomous. "Not this time," he'd exclaimed. This drew Sindri's attention, who saw Brock's eyes whiten and glaze over. A cold, numbing poison quickly spread through Brock's body. His arms stopped responding, his vision doubled and blurred, his legs gave out, and he began to fall. Sindri caught Brock before he hit the floor, but the master blacksmith was already dead. Consumed by the horror of losing his brother, Sindri sought to undo his death. He put Brock's body into a small wagon, and he journeyed to Alfheim, the realm of the elves, and he rushed to the Lake of Souls. He put on one of Brock's gloves, a sacred and personal item worn by dwarven blacksmiths, and he went into the lake. He felt himself drawn towards a small blue wisp, the soul of his brother. He had to interrupt its passage into the lake, return it to his brother's body before it could pass into the afterlife. Before Sindri could reach it, a hand grabbed him from below. He looked down into the dark waters and he saw half-buried undead covering the lake bed. The presence of a living soul and a body called to them, an alluring target that they would yearn to consume. Sindri cut the hands away and swam as fast as he could towards Brock's soul. He had to reach it before the undead of the lake took him. He reached out his gloved hand and he grabbed the wisp. A great explosion pushed back the undead, and it pushed Sindri towards the shore. He pulled himself out of the lake, uncertain if he had succeeded in bringing his brother back to life. He vomited up a black sludge and felt as though thousands of insects were inside his skin, like the dead were still clutching at him. He tried to brush away the phantom hands, he scratched at his hands and his hair, but he could find no relief. In his exhaustion and panic, Sindri collapsed into a terrified slumber. When he awoke, he went to the wagon where Brock's body lay, still blue from death. He pulled off Brock's glove and he felt his chest. There was the faintest heartbeat. Sindri smiled, believing that he had succeeded, but he came to realize that he had done something terrible. He fragmented Brock's soul, never to be made whole again. This would deny Brock an afterlife. A broken soul could not pass through the lake. Brock awoke several days later with no memory of what had happened. All he observed was that his brother suddenly had a twitch about his face. The brothers resumed their work on the new weapon, an axe. Brock's forging and Sindri's intricate craftsmanship complemented the other, and upon its completion even Brock remarked that it needed a name. Sindri replied, "This instrument was born as a mighty foil to the hammer. It will be legend in the hands of an honorable soul. So who is greatest without equal? Perhaps the great serpent of Midgard, methinks." Brock replied, "He who dwells beneath the sea and said its body wraps the world, no greater thing can therefore be." Sindri agreed. "Then let this blade find trial in a hero's hollowed hand. Let its aim fly straight and true across these ragged lands. Let its purpose find a place high up and further in. Bring us peace and hope once more. Rise now, Leviathan." The one who would wield the Leviathan axe was the Jotun champion Laufey the Just. No finer choice could they have made. Laufey was a renowned woman, a protector of the weak, champion of her people, a dreaded foe to the Aesir, even a fearsome being to Thor himself. She'd led rebellions alongside the dwarves of Svartalfheim against Odin, and Laufey was also a seer. Laufey too saw the coming of a ghost to the northern lands. She knew that she would have a son, a champion to her suffering people, a journey the father and son would need to take, somehow to reach her home realm. Then they would walk Groa's prophecy of Ragnarok. The visions of the Jotnar were etched and painted into special shrines and placed around the 9 realms as markers and stories, but those with Jotnar magic could see deeper into the shrines, beyond the paintings laid on them. Within these shrines, too, were secret prophecies of the giants, and if Odin knew this, oh, what he wouldn't do to glimpse those secrets. Freya's sadness in Asgard, it was softened by her Valkyries and her son Balder. Freya was unmatched in her magical powers, but she too was nigh unbeatable as a fighter. The Valkyries' job was to usher the souls of warriors onto Valhalla. To do this, they had to be greater warriors than even the most legendary of mortals, for if a soul turned against them, they had to best them in battle. To be a Valkyrie was to be hope, joy, and certain death in one form. No better queen could there have been for the Valkyries than the Vanir goddess Freya. But the prophecy of Baldur's needless death haunted her. She spent 20 years trying to find a way to protect him from it. Even when he became an adult and a powerful Aesir in his own right, she tried to shield him from it. With the help of another Vanir named Hildisvini, and with the aid of Mimir, she crafted a protection spell and she cast it upon Baldur without telling him. But there was a complication. Baldur was invulnerable, yes, but he couldn't feel anything, no pain, pleasure, sensation of any sort. The Aesir culture was built around fighting, feasting, and fornicating, and this effectively alienated Baldur from all of it. He was enraged. He wanted Freya to undo the spell, but she couldn't. This tortured Baldur, and he hated his mother for this act. She tried to tell him that it was for his own good, tried to get him to see things her way, but she had taken choice away from him. And every day, his hatred for Freya would grow because of what she took from him. Baldur's rejection and Odin's abuses became more than Freya could bear. The genocide of the Jotun continued. Odin's cruel uses of Vanir magic were blasphemous. Thor was unstoppable, and she just wanted to go home. So Freya fled from Asgard. She tried to go back home to Vanaheim to be with her people again. But Odin caught her before she made it through the realm gate, and he cursed her. She would be trapped within Midgard, never able to leave that realm. He took her Valkyrie wings and her warrior spirit, making her unable to fight back. Baldur abandoned her to this fate, choosing to stay with his father Odin in Asgard. Freya lost everything, and what became of her was a guarded secret. Odin tried to take control of the Valkyries, But while they were servants of Odin, he did not own them and could not dictate to them their duties. So, he cast a wretched spell over them, forcing them into physical bodies that he could control. But doing this corrupted their spirits. They became malicious, rabid, and dangerous to all. They began murdering everything that crossed their paths all around the 9 realms. The one who tried to lead the Valkyries was Sigrun. She became the de facto queen, but she couldn't save her sisters. She couldn't undo Odin's magics, and after a few years, Sigrun too felt herself becoming maddened. In a final attempt to stop the rampaging Valkyries and soon herself, Sigrun imprisoned all of the Valkyries across the realms. Their only hope was in defeat. If someday a warrior could strike each of them down, then they would be freed of their corrupted bodies, free to return home, free to be true Valkyries again. Sigrun succeeded in locking them all away, and then finally, herself. Some years later, a ghost appeared in the Northlands. He came from the south, but none observed his arrival. For so long he traveled alone, fighting to control his rage, trying to forget his past, trying to leave behind his instruments of death, his blades of chaos. Crafted by the long-dead god Hephaestus, they were imbued with primordial fire. He'd used them to kill gods, family, the innocent. He tried to deny them, throw them away, be done with that life, but he could never outrun his past or his deeds. Kratos of Sparta, god of war, a broken man carrying the punishing weight of his own rage and ego, and he deserved every tormented step of his journey. When he arrived in the north, he hid from people. He practiced tempering his rage against the monsters and beasts of this land. He would not seek fights, and when approached, he tried to end them without violence. He failed at that very often, though. His rage would bubble to the surface, he would tear things apart with his bare hands, and feel shame at losing control. But eventually, his self-control began to win out a little bit more often than not. Kratos, once of Sparta, began to slowly change. Very, very slowly. So slowly that he didn't even realize the progress that he was making. A rock moving 2 inches over the course of a week seems unmoving to the naked eye. While Kratos secretly roamed these new lands, Thor's rampage across the realms continued. The giants of Jotunheim, who were not in their homeland, were almost completely wiped out. A few years after the ghost of Sparta arrived in Midgard, the Jotnar decided to leave all the other realms. All the giants were called back home, to hide from the Aesir as long as possible. There weren't many of them left at this point. It was a desperate attempt to save their people. Laufey decided to stay in Midgard, to not go back home to Jotunheim. She knew that she had a role to play in the prophecy of Ragnarok, so she stayed. For over 70 years, she would roam the realms alone, fighting the Aesir, protecting who she could, awaiting the events of prophecy. But the giants, the Jotun themselves, they retreated back to their homeland. They were taken with fear. There was no place left to run. If Odin made it through that bridge, they would be completely wiped out. So they decided to hide themselves away. The giants would whisper their souls into special small stones to be hidden and protected by ones who would stay in Jotunheim. They hoped that their souls would be preserved, so that if one day there was peace between the realms, the giants could somehow return to life. But if there was no peace, if Odin and his Aesir found a way into Jotunheim, they would only find the corpses of the giants, strewn about the mountains so that it would seem that they had all died. Once the giants were all gone, Brock and Sindri's relationship grew more hostile. Sometimes they would have all-out fistfights to settle their disagreements. The two brothers parted ways after one particularly bad brawl, each of them intent on proving how little they needed the other. And Mimir, he also had been blessed with very special Bifrost eyes, much like Tyr, and he never gave up trying to bring about peace. He tried to convince Odin that the only way to stop Ragnarok was to create harmony between the realms. But Odin believed Mimir to be a traitor, just like Tyr. Odin took Mimir to Midgard, to the tallest mountain summit where the inactive bridge to Jotunheim was. He bound Mimir with the roots of Yggdrasil, facing the inactive gateway. He plucked out one of his eyes, hid it within the statue of Thor at the Lake of the Nine, and returned every day to torture Mimir. He promised he would stop if Mimir told him the rune which would unlock the gate to Jotunheim, but Mimir just didn't know the rune. Odin's creativity when it came to torture never ceased to amaze him. After decades of solitude, two warriors met in the wilds of Midgard by chance, the Ghost of Sparta and the Jotun champion. Kratos and Laufey fought each other on sight, driven by instinct to kill, but it was a brief clashing. They both quickly realized that the other was not a threat and that they were both battle-weary. Instead, they spoke and they quickly became friends. Kratos didn't think that Faye was anything other than a normal Midgard woman who also happened to be one of the greatest warriors in all the realms. The two of them bonded, and slowly Kratos opened up to Faye about his past and where he'd come from. Faye never told Kratos about her being a giant though, or her seer abilities, or why she was still in Midgard. 5 years after meeting, they built a home together in the wildwoods and settled into a domestic life as husband and wife. For several years, they had peace with each other. Faye's sharp wit and humor made Kratos smile. She was fearless in his presence, and she called him Grumbles. And once past his cold demeanor, Kratos could be a good conversationalist with countless stories to tell and great insights. They were happy together. Kratos could never be rid of his blades of chaos, so he kept them under the house, hidden away but always close. He hoped that he would never have to pick them up again. 15 years after Kratos and Faye were wed, Hellwalkers began to roam Midgard. Helheim was full. There were no Valkyries to carry on warrior spirits to Valhalla, so the armies of Hell were well manned. Those who couldn't enter Hell were forced back into Midgard, forced back into their own corpses, to lumber and roam as undead monsters. It was a sign of Ragnarok approaching. Then, 27 years after they'd met, Kratos and Faye had a child, a boy that they named Atreus, named after a great Spartan warrior and a friend of Kratos, whose joy and hope inspired others. Atreus wore a smile even in the worst of times. He reminded the other Spartans that though they were machines of war, they were still human. There was still goodness to be found in even them. The Spartan Atreus gave his life in battle to save his fellow soldiers' lives so that they could achieve a much-needed victory. Kratos had carried Atreus' body over 100 miles back home so that he could be buried where he belonged, in Sparta. But this baby boy, he had another name, a Jotun name, Loki, given to him by his mother. But that name was not told to the boy, and he was only ever called Atreus at home. The name Loki was mostly forgotten by Kratos, but Faye kept it close. It would hold importance later, she knew. Faye primarily raised Atreus. She taught him languages, reading, writing, how to hunt. She crafted him a magnificent bow. She told him countless stories about the 9 realms. She knew that he was going to walk a difficult road, and she did everything she could to prepare him. Atreus was part Spartan god, part Jotun giant, yet he was completely unaware of the power within. It was suppressed, ignored, not acknowledged. Faye couldn't reveal her giant heritage as it would interfere with the prophecy, and Kratos was certainly not going to tell a little boy about his murderous past. So Atreus grew up sickly. The buried powers within him festered like a wound, and when he got upset or overly excited, it would burst and cause him physical distress. The boy was also very uneasy around his father. Kratos seemed to be displeased by everything, a perpetual critic. In Sparta, the young boy would have been sent to train as a soldier as soon as he could run, and that his small, sickly son was being taught stories, songs, and languages must have been conflicting for the old Spartan. He wasn't the best of dads, but Faye was a superb mother. By the time Atreus was 7 years old, almost all other mortals had left Midgard for other lands or realms. Hellwalkers widely roamed the lands, vicious beasts of the mountain and depths were emerging to walk under the sun. What few tribes did remain became feral, superstitious, and ferocious. Around the wildwoods, Faye created a barrier to hide them from the Aesir, to keep her family safe from the dangers now stalking Midgard. And it was none too soon. Odin heard tell that there was a giant still in Midgard someplace. He was obsessed with reaching Jotunheim, convinced that there he would find a way to avoid Ragnarok. Tyr had been imprisoned in Asgard for centuries and hadn't said a word. His ravens, travelers, and Aesir kin couldn't find any clues about how to open that last bridge. Finding and interrogating this last giant could be his only chance to reach that realm now. Odin summoned his son Balder and tasked him with finding this giant. Odin promised Balder that if they could find a way into Jotunheim, that he could undo Freya's protection spell. He promised Balder that he could feel again, be Aesir again, and Balder believed Odin. Jotunheim and this last giant too became his obsession. Baldur searched Midgard, but he couldn't find any trace of a giant. Faye's protection barrier around the wildwood was perfect. They were practically invisible to the Aesir. Freya herself probably had no idea that they were there. Baldur enlisted his nephews Magni and Modi to aid him in the search. The two sons of Thor had been subjected to the same generational trauma that Thor had. Their mother Sif loved them dearly, but she didn't shield them from Thor's anger and abuses. She couldn't. How do you stop somebody like Thor? Thor favored Magni over Modi, something made very clear to Modi early on, which instilled resentment and a huge inferiority complex into him. But neither of them were treated well. They both grew into absolute assholes, to rival even their father. Baldur never gave up his search. He scoured every corner of Midgard. And then one day, his luck changed. One day, when Atreus was still quite young, Kratos and Faye walked the wild woods together. She marked certain trees with yellow paint on her hands and spoke with grumbles about death and her wishes when she passed. Kratos was resistant to the conversation. He didn't want to imagine a world without Faye, and he doubted his ability to be a good father to Atreus. But Faye had a way of making complex feelings very simple. She was mortal, and she just wanted to make sure that she was leaving a better world behind for him and for her son. All love ends in grief. It's inevitable. She told Kratos that she wished to be cremated and for her ashes to be spread from the highest peak in all the realms. She did not ask him to do this. She told him. Faye knew her fate and knew that Kratos was not ready. She could not make him ready. Only he could do that. She told him that if he just opened his heart to the world the way that he had done to her, he would find every reason to keep living in it. When Atreus was about 11, Faye got sick. It was time for her to make preparations outside of the wild woods for her death. She began trekking out, leaving Kratos and Atreus on their own for days at a time. They didn't know what she was doing, and Kratos never questioned Faye. He trusted her completely. Laufey knew their journey would begin soon and that her death would be the catalyst for it. She would guide them along to where they needed to be. She hid away parts of Jotun shrines that betrayed the secrets of Kratos and her son, and she marked their paths with yellow paints. When she returned from her ventures, she looked pale, tired, and sick. Once, she told Atreus stories by the fire with gusto and flair, but now she was quiet with her words. Her love and kindness never faded, though. She still told Atreus stories and worked to ready her son and her husband. When her tasks were complete, finally, Faye returned home for the last time, and Laufey the Just passed on. The world Atreus knew was gone. The boy deeply grieved his mother. Kratos had promises to keep and now a son to raise on his own. He knew that he was not ready for this, but how could anyone be prepared for such a thing? Kratos honored Faye's wishes. He set out to build the pyre from the trees she had selected from around the wild woods, marked with her yellow handprints. He took his son with him, and they trekked around the woods, cutting each one down, not knowing that these trees were the barrier that had kept them safe within the woods. When the final one was felled, the unseen protective spell faded away. Atreus doesn't hide his pain, his sadness. He speaks of his mother, tries to engage with his father, his only protector and parent now. But Kratos was never at ease with his son, never open like he was with Faye. Atreus isn't frightened of Kratos, but he's not comfortable. He thinks his father hates him and that he doesn't want him around. He wants his mother back instead. Why did it have to be her? While Kratos doesn't show it, he is deeply mourning this loss. Faye was his world just as much as she was her son's. He knows Atreus is sickly because of his dormant, festering god powers, but Kratos is unwilling to reveal his own secrets, unwilling to tell Atreus what he actually is. That his father is a monster, a killer, a god from another land. How does one even train a young god to be a god, especially a child so small and seemingly ill? On the boat ride back to the house, Atreus asks if something has changed. The forest feels different. He can feel that the barrier is gone, but Kratos doesn't. He tells the boy to just ignore the feelings. They journey on in mostly silence. Even on the best of days, they wouldn't have had much to talk about. Kratos would give orders, grunt, tell Atreus not to do something, grunt again, or just ignore him. As Kratos sets up the pyre, Atreus goes inside the house to see his mother wrapped in her burial shroud. The cloth has been wrapped beautifully, decorated with flowers from around the woods, a knife holding it tight. Atreus lights the candles around her and says a funeral prayer. Though his pain is palpable and he sheds his tears, Atreus carries himself with strength, certainly instilled in him by Faye. When his lumbering father approaches, Atreus tells him that she is ready. His final words to Faye are wishes for her to find her way home. Kratos carries Laufey to her pyre, and with the Leviathan axe which now he wields, he sets it aflame. Impulsively, Atreus reaches out into the flame and grabs his mother's knife and apologizes for burning himself, yet Kratos doesn't chastise him. His mother would want him to have it. He tends to the wound instead. They will not remain here to watch Faye burn away. Kratos turns Atreus' attention away from the grief, telling him that they are going to go hunting for deer, and the boy will lead the hunt. For only being about 11 years old, Atreus is a great hunter, though impulsive and easily excited, which makes him less apt to listen. He is only a child, after all. He tracks down a huge deer, misfires an arrow against his father's wishes, and has to earn back his bow and arrow privileges. The final tree for the pyre was felled not even an hour ago, and already the outside world is intruding upon this once haven. Draugr, and a lot of them. They would appear from time to time within the wild woods, but not this many. That doesn't mean the hunting trip is over, though. The two of them continue their hunt through parts of the woods that the boy has never been through before, a bit of new excitement for him. When they track the deer, Atreus gets the bow back and follows directions this time, landing a shot in the massive creature, bringing it down. But then the harder part of the hunt. It isn't dead, and it's suffering. Faye always took care of this part, but Kratos tells Atreus that he needs to finish what he started. And he tries. He holds the knife to the creature, but he just can't. He's too gentle of a person. So Kratos holds his hands and they do it together. They almost have a sweet moment together of bonding, but Kratos he can't open up his heart yet. But you know what is open about their emotions and thoughts? Trolls. There's one within the wild woods, and it's very communicative about how it feels. Kratos will command Atreus to strike key points on the enemy with his arrows. There could be no finer test of the boy than this. He ultimately succeeded in the hunt, but now it's time for all-out combat. They bring down the Death Merchant after one hell of a brawl, but the excitement of the experience brings out an impulsive aggression within Atreus. He slashes and screams at the corpse of the troll, taunting it, insulting it. It's a blind anger that could get him killed in dangerous situations. Kratos tells him that he is not ready for the journey that Faye would have them take. And Atreus argues, he found the deer, he hasn't been sick in a long time. And his father just repeats himself without explanation. That's the end of the discussion. They encounter more odd creatures on the path back to the house. Atreus' questions are met with "be silent" from grumbles. Kratos doesn't know why the Draugr are so close to the house, or why a fire troll was in the forest, or how monsters are nearby. They shouldn't be. So, what's changed? By the time they're home, the pyre has finished burning. He tells the boy to go inside, and Kratos goes to the ashes alone, to do what was told to him by Faye. He gathers up some of her ashes into a pouch, there to be scattered from the highest peak in all the realms. It's such a simple command, which will set in motion a grand venture. The boy is having an attitude, talking to himself about how his dad doesn't know anything, that his mother being gone didn't change anything about Kratos. But as soon as the old man is in the room, the talking begins. The boy lost control over his anger. Kratos fought and tested himself for decades to temper his, and he doesn't want that anger to be passed on to his son. He wants him to learn that yes, it exists, but to control it, to use it as a weapon if he must, not to be consumed by it. Though he doesn't really effectively communicate those exact words to Atreus. When the boy argues back, Kratos pushes him into a situation that he knows will make him angry. He tells the boy to try punching his hand. Atreus' failed attempts earn him harsh slaps on the arms, which will of course make him mad. He escalates his attempts, refuses to back down, yells at Kratos to stop it, punches harder, and then gets reckless enough that he sends himself toppling down, coughing. The boy is not ready. Kratos tries to deliver a lesson about anger, but his eyes are drawn away as he speaks. There's something in the distance, a sound that's dividing his attention. It grows loud enough that the boy hears it too. Someone is at the door, and they want to talk. They claim to know who and what is within. Kratos orders Atreus under the floorboards, dangerously close to where the Blades of Chaos are kept, and he goes to the door alone. Baldur has arrived, ever in search for the last giant of Midgard, not knowing that the one he sought is dead. It's believable that Kratos could be a Jotun giant, though Baldur thought that he would be bigger. He's definitely the one he's been seeking, though, the one who could reveal the secrets of the bridge to Jotunheim. The words each man speaks are grave meaning to the other, but not by intent. Baldur's extrapolation of their conversation would be far different from that of Kratos's, yet neither man is being untruthful. It's dual meanings, yet both unite to make them enemies. Kratos thinks this man is a part of his past coming to catch up with him, and Baldur thinks that he's a giant that can get him into Jotunheim. Kratos gives him 3 full punches before he deigns it necessary to hit back. Neither of them are putting their weight behind their fists, though. Baldur is expecting a Jotun, and Kratos is uncertain what he's really dealing with. This guy could just be a drunk mortal for all he knows. But now it's time for Baldur to hit back, time for the wind-up, and the real punches begin. Baldur launches Kratos over the house, and they begin one hell of a one-on-one. The Spartan hits this strange being repeatedly with a Leviathan axe, but nothing stops him. He just gets right back up again. Almost certainly, he is a god of this realm. His speed is spectacular, and he inflicts pain without even using a weapon. This stranger, he uses his fists, knees, elbows, and heels to harm. He doesn't even wear armor, as though he doesn't need it. The two of them land on the roof at one point, punching a hole through it, and the stranger asks Kratos, why are there 2 beds in the house? They know this massive man isn't here alone now, and Kratos' rage heightens. He just wants this stranger to leave. And this clearly struck a nerve, and the intruding god quite enjoys it. Baldur is making him mad. That's progress. He starts asking who he's hiding, who's in the house. Baldur mocks the man's age, tells him he shouldn't have come to Midgard, and then heals himself completely. If this old man won't talk, then maybe whoever is in the house will. And again, this makes Kratos more upset, more angered, and the intruder very much notices. There is something of value being hidden in that house, and he would love to figure out what. They have another complete round 2. The stranger claims to be bored, but he's laughing. The more angry this supposed Jotun giant becomes, the better the fight. Kratos beats them bloody, brings a massive boulder down onto the intruder, shifts the landmasses around his house with the weight of the battle, and brings himself to the point of exhaustion. But it's finally quiet. He stumbles towards the house. Hopefully this strange laughing man stays down. But no, that's not how this is going to work. They rise again and throw the heaving rock back at Kratos, now shifting to a bit of conversation amidst the struggle. He tells them that he's here for Odin, and he just wanted answers. This fight is all Kratos' fault. This stranger will never stop coming, and he wants Kratos to know one thing. He can't feel any of this. They land upon opposing sides of a gorge, and the stranger keeps talking and taunting. But now it's making less sense to Kratos. There's no double meaning to be found in it. He says that he's not like his brother, that he could have just talked it out and none of this would have happened. What Baldur is referring to is a battle that Thor once had with Lofe. It ended in a violent stalemate. These 2 strangers still have no idea what they're actually dealing with in the other god. A round 3 begins, and this time things are far less fun. The stranger isn't as vocal, he's more aggressive, like he's become angry as well. Or perhaps it's frustration. There's no laughter when he's thrown about, and his grapples aren't as clean. Kratos gets him to the ground in a chokehold to contain him, but this cannot end peacefully. The stranger says that he wished the old man could make him feel something, but he can't. Kratos breaks his neck, and he pushes the stranger into the ravine. As Kratos limps back to the house, back to his son, he asks himself, did that man know him? Did he know of his past? How did they find him after all these hundreds of years? How? He calls to Faye and he asks her what to do. He knows Atreus is not ready for the journey ahead, but neither is he. He knows that he isn't. What is he supposed to do without her? But he knows that they cannot stay here. Kratos collects Atreus from under the house, orders him to get ready, and checks that the Blades of Chaos are untouched. Those will be staying here. The boy collects his things, and the two of them leave their home behind. The highest peak of this realm is visible from the Wildwoods, and it's going to be one hell of a trip. But Faye's orders were absolute. As they walk, Atreus asks about the intruder and what happened, but Kratos has no idea what really happened there, who they were, what they wanted. All he knows is that a guy named Odin sent him. He can heal through anything, and that he doesn't feel pain. They have to learn to work together to make it through the mountains. Paths marked with yellow paint guide them on, and it's not long until they find a routine of pathfinding and problem-solving, with each of them playing to their own strengths. It's excellent training for Atreus, and Kratos is learning more about how capable his son truly is. On a hillside overlooking the Wildwoods, Atreus sees the outline of his mother's once protective barrier. He pieces together what it was, and that the stave was broken, the trees that she had told Kratos to cut down. Faye planned for the barrier to fall, but why would she do that? There are very few mortals left in the northern realms of Midgard. Plenty of corpses, though. People who died violent deaths at the hands of the beasts of the land. But that's not to say that there are no clans still carving out life here, extreme and violent lives. They're called Reavers, and they've resorted to cannibalism to fill their meat stores. As soon as they see Kratos and Atreus, they rally to hunt and butcher. Kratos takes the bulk of them, but is separated from Atreus across the arena, and when the battle ends, he finds Atreus under the body of a Reaver. The boy has taken his first human life, and it's immediately clear that it's horrified him. It's different when it's a human being. Atreus feels things deeply, and he starts crying when he sees his dad. Kratos knows that if Atreus lets that fear and sadness haunt him, he'll never make it through this journey. He has to be able to defend himself. So he tells Atreus to close his heart off to it. He gives the boy a few moments, and then he diverts his attention back to the journey ahead. But the newly dead don't stay down. Remember, Helheim is full, and the souls of those that they just killed are forced to return back to their bodies as Hellwalkers, new foes which will be plentiful on the road. Spies of Odin are all around the mountains. The All-Father will be well aware of what is taking place here, and he won't be confusing identities like Baldur did. Odin isn't really one to do his own dirty work, though, not when he has Aesir lackeys on call. He will watch from afar within Asgard what this new strange god does. There's a melodic and gracious voice of a dignified, regal dwarf coming from a crossing. Surely whoever this voice belongs to is a creature of divine beauty. The duo make the acquaintance of Brock, brother of Sindri, co-creator of both Mjolnir and the Leviathan Axe, former friend of Laufey the Just. His pack animal isn't moving no matter what he does, and Atreus tells him that it's because she's afraid of something in the trees. Kratos tosses the axe into the trees, scares something off, and sure enough, the pack animal is just fine after that. So Atreus can understand the emotions of animals. They all get going, and Brock quite fearlessly starts talking to Kratos. He tells him that, well, he made the axe that he's wearing, he and his brother, and Kratos should only let him work on it. Kratos outright doesn't believe him, but Brock is able to point out a particular rune and its location on the axe without even seeing it. It's his own brand. Brock's sass is directly comparable to Kratos' moodiness. If the spiciness of Brock and the gloom of Kratos entered into Mortal Kombat, I think a black hole would form before there was a winner. Brock will provide upgrades to both of them, and act as a sometimes information source, but always as a trustworthy pal. Dwarves can shift between realms to get around to avoid danger, and not many can see through this neat little trick of theirs, so Brock will pop up all around the realms to set up shop and provide his services. It's not just smash and thrash that gets them through the mountains. Kratos comes to rely on Atreus' ability to read other languages and decipher riddles. He himself never learned how to read the Northern Word, and if Kratos can't figure something out, the boy joins in to help him find things that he may have overlooked. When they finally reach the end of the mountain path, Kratos finds tracks in the mud, maybe that of a boar. They've been all business for a while, so Kratos calls the boy over to it. He is going to track it. They're going to hunt. They clear their way past more Draugr, another troll, another mountain tunnel, and spot their prize. Kratos allows Atreus to aim and fire all on his own. The boy is focused, he's being patient, and independence is due for it. He slowly aims and fires, but the arrow bounces off, and Atreus almost offensively questions what happened. Maybe the boar is magical. But his father doesn't chastise. Atreus did everything right. Instead, he gets on the boy's level and he calmly asks Atreus what does he think went wrong. And the boy recognizes that this boar is very strange, so they're going to continue tracking it. They trek through an old tiny village only kept by the corpses of human and Draugr now, and they find the boar on the other side of the desolate village. And again, Atreus aims on it all on his own. This time, the arrow deeply pierces its hide. The boy takes off to continue his tracking, and Kratos is right behind him, but there's a strange fog about, and in one moment, Kratos loses sight of the boy. Atreus had dropped his mother's dagger, Kratos picked it up, and when he looked up, Atreus was just gone. Panic starts to set in when he can't find the boy. He runs through the trails, but the dense fog obfuscates everything. He can hear Atreus calling to him, but he can't find him. The longer it goes on, the more distressed he becomes, almost reaching a pitch of fear. When he breaks through the fog into a clearing, he finds his son, kneeling before the Witch of the Woods.